For All the Saints podcast. I'm delighted to have with me today Jacob Wall-Smith. Jacob, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. Yes, excited to be on the podcast. I've listened to almost every episode, and
Oh
yeah,
wow!
nearly caught
Oh,
up. Nearly caught up.
oh, thank you. I didn't know that, but thank you. And well, I'm really excited to have you on the show as well because we had a great episode the other week with Peter Trebilcock about the Preston Temple, and now we have, which by the way, this fact surprised me that I heard from your fireside about the topic. This is the first temple, the Birmingham Temple that you're working on, the first temple in Europe for 10 years to have it groundbreaking. Is that correct?
Yes, at least that's what the Church Newsroom article leads me to believe. So, yeah, it's just kind of the first, I suppose, where the groundbreaking was announced. Even though there are a number of European temples in the kind of design and planning stages.
Yeah, because we've got even in the UK, we've got Dublin coming, we've got Scotland, Edinburgh coming. So it's a really exciting time. But in terms of the Birmingham Temple, how did you get involved with that project? What's the story there?
Um, how I got involved, I suppose, going back to my very first day in the workforce after I'd graduated from university, um, I just started at this architectural practice called BDP, and I sat down next to someone, and I looked over, and they had a picture of the London Temple on their
Oh,
screen, and I thought that's really strange because I got married there a couple of months ago. Or I got sealed there rather, and they were doing some renovation works on the external kind of entrance. I think the ramp down to the baptistry and things like that. And because of that, I realised that the company I worked for had some relationship with the church. Um, and then I did a bit more digging and found out that uh, Peter Trebilcock who you had on the podcast, used to work for that same practice and worked on the Preston Temple. And so that they were all things that I didn't know when I'd applied to work at this place. But when the Birmingham Temple was announced, I thought, well, I'm going to speak to every Area 70 that I meet through FSY. I'm going to speak to anyone who may potentially have a way in to work on this. And that included yeah, some friends of mine who are also in the construction industry, and we and I don't know the exact mechanics of it, but one day an email landed in my inbox, my work inbox, asking my company to bid for the project.
wow. So you didn't know that this company that you had applied for had links to previous church projects when you did it. Like it wasn't like oh, there's a friend who's a church member, I'll go and try and get a job there. It wasn't
No,
anything like that.
not at all. It wasn't a factor in my decision, and now obviously I feel that some um, yeah, some stars have aligned, or rather some tender mercies have been in my path to lead me to be working on it, but at the time that wasn't something I was aware of.
That's crazy. And what's your role with the temple then?
So I'm the project architect, and I should probably say up front, because the project is still ongoing. I'm still under a contract, under a NDA, not to disclose certain things, personnel and details about the design, but because there's obviously a planning application that's been submitted, a lot, well, some information is public knowledge, and I can I can talk about that public knowledge. Um, so I'm the project architect, and that's essentially I do design, but it's also a role of coordination amongst the team. So there's obviously interior designers as well, a big factor in the temple design. There's a lot of engineers, structural, mechanical, electrical engineers, and of course landscape architects for the beautiful temple grounds. And I essentially help all these different construction disciplines or design disciplines um, coordinate their design together so that the temple is in harmony and that everything works as it should, and that we don't have uh, light switches behind paintings, so that we don't have lights that are too bright in um, the changing rooms and too dark in the celestial room, so that we don't have anything that distracts from the the experience of the patrons.
At what stage is this? Well, at what stage was this temple announced at conference in terms of like the timescale that you were already on with the temple? And do you have any insight into what that is generally for temples?
So I first heard about the temple in conference.
Oh,
So
right.
we weren't involved uh, in the selection of sites. We weren't involved in even knowing anything about the project really until this email landed in my inbox. But the Area 70 Elder Turvey spoke at a fireside recently, in that there was a selection process made of different sites where the temple could be. And I think once the site that it's currently at, which is in Sutton Coldfield, was selected, then it was announced in conference, and that was about 9 months before my involvement.
Right, I see. So that was like a conference spurred you on, as you said before, to then go and speak to everyone
Yes,
you
yes,
possibly
yes.
could. To,
So that announcement was
right.
made and said, "I'm an architect. I live in Birmingham. We have connections to the church already. So how can we make this work? Really?"
So I'd love to get some insights from you on the architecture and the process of design for this temple. Because again, I'm mindful here of we've had a temple that was dedicated in 1998 on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and so it's kind of interesting to hear if there are any not that you were involved with the Preston Temple, but from
Mhm.
what you're saying, if there is kind of differences or things that are the same, common things that happen, um, whether it's 1998, 2025, whatever, but yeah, I would just love to get some insight from you, being around the table as this temple was designed and kind of the process of designing it and the architecture of it, because um, it's really when I saw the plan for it, I thought this looks like an English parish church, which I loved. Like it's got that look about it.
Mhm.
So yeah. Anyway, I would love to hear you talk about it.
Well, as you are well aware, the rate at which temples are being announced is increasing, and as part of that, the church has tried to streamline, I suppose, the design and construction of temples, and there are certain elements now that are less bespoke than they were in the past. Um, it might, if you look at the first 20 temples of this dispensation, they all look different. They all look unique, and if you look at maybe the previous 20 temples that have been announced, there are some similarities, and that's simply because the First Presidency's primary objective is to enable as many people as possible to have the temple blessings. And so we were given a standard kind of massing of the site of the temple. That's what we call it. The massing as being kind of the blocks, the the scale of it, the size of it, and because there's so many temples, we were also given a general layout, so a floor plan, which they know works. They know, okay, it's good to have changing rooms next to these places. It's good to have uh, certain rooms adjacent to each other, just because of the nature the temple operates. And so, what we had to do then is translate that kind of template into the UK and into our local building regulations in terms of the different arrangement of the floor plan, to make sure there was not too far a distance anywhere in the temple for someone to escape. That's because of fire regulations, which have become a lot more stringent in the past few years. And then in terms of the external architecture, obviously, even though there is these templates, each temple has links to its surroundings, its local architecture. And when I say local architecture, that doesn't necessarily mean 5 mile radius, but the kind of country that it's in. Um, yeah, there's some motifs. There's some architectural details, particularly like you said, the English parish church. You'll see if you've seen the rendering, um, a certain Gothic revival style. It's always
Yeah.
in debate as to what you might call certain styles, but arched windows, a slightly flattened arch, and a lot of intricate kind of buttresses, the parapets at the top, and a lot of stonework in terms of carving around the windows, around the base of the um, temple, and then of course the spire, which in itself is a symbol of reaching heavenward and is found in a lot of Christian churches. But yeah, for this temple, it's largely decorative. We're not ringing any bells, um, and it really, yeah, really has a lot of intricate stonework on that.
That's something that has been impressed on us recently with the designs of recent houses of the Lord is the importance of the spire and the symbolism of it, which I think is really cool. And as you say, there's kind of this like semi strawberry gothic feel to the Birmingham Temple rendering, and the spire is almost like a, a partial turret in itself. You know, the
Mm.
way it's designed, which I think looks so cool. And in terms of the vernacular, like, are there any other specific things that were like we want a nod to the area that were in the design? I was thinking this when they announced it. I was like, what is Birmingham famous for? Because you have the Rome Temple. There's lots of ovals. There are paintings of olive trees in it, and things like that that were kind of important to have specifically for Rome. Um, and so I was thinking, okay, what is specific to Birmingham? And so I was googling what's Birmingham famous for, and the first thing that came up is the Balti was was created in Birmingham, invented. So I was like, oh, I wonder if there can be a nod to the Balti and a chicken Balti in the temple or something. But of course, probably not. But that seems to be a lot of what Birmingham is famous for. But is there ever like a discussion of that, or is it very much kind of we want specific like small motifs here and there or whatnot?
Yeah, well, in terms of the church as a client, so I don't know if I did make that clear, but I don't work for the church. I'm working, I suppose, with
Yes,
the
yeah.
church as my client. Um, they you know they like to have these local nods, but like I say, it's not necessarily Birmingham specific. It's just perhaps English architecture, and I don't think anything was ever presented that was you know related to the bull ring or anything that
The
anything.
Bullring is a shopping centre in Birmingham for those listening who aren't
Oh yeah,
there. And
yeah,
it's a great shopping centre.
exactly, and named because historically there used to be an actual bull ring that bulls used to, I don't suppose, perform in or do something in.
No
But
way, I didn't know that.
but yeah, like I said, it's more to do with the general area of English architecture and looking at the renders. The stained glass windows, for example, have a diagonal diamond pattern, and you'll see that in a lot of the old leaded windows with these diamonds that were put in the windows, and that's one of the designs that's been pulled through. Um, but yeah, there wasn't a lengthy exercise on our side in terms of pulling out local motifs. It was very much something that the church said, these are the ideas that we'd like.
Right. There is a motif that's quite striking above the entrance door. Are you allowed to just discuss the inspiration for that? It's kind of, I don't know, it's like one of those really ancient Christian crosses that you see up and down the UK almost. Could you describe that?
Yeah, so it's a diamond, and within it, an almost a four-sided, I suppose, a bit like a four-leaved clover, but
Mm.
four circles within the diamond, and um, that symbol is used across a lot of Christian architecture. And even though it predates Christianity itself, like with a lot of symbols, different religions and different groups of people adopt symbols. And so this was one because of the kind of four distinct sections that's been used in Christian architecture to relate to the four Gospels of the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Also, the four corners of the earth, and we know that the gospel's to be preached to the four corners of the earth in the last
That's
days. Um, and another way that it's used is as like you said, an abstraction of the cross, which is not something that we show on a lot of our buildings in the church, a cross, but because of this kind of abstraction that's been used on a lot of local churches, it's something which has been included because it ties in with the local English architecture.
that's really cool. I loved seeing it. I think it's a beautiful addition. And you kind of, on the Preston Temple, we heard Peter talk about the motifs on the side of the temple depicting the different states of the moon or the sun. I think it was, and kind of that feeling that we see in, I think, all the temples is this kind of hint to the importance of progression. And I don't know. You've mentioned before that this kind of. Do you feel that there's a stepping away from that kind of overt symbolism and more sort of nuanced or subtle? I want maybe is that kind of similar to what you were saying with the kind of less individualistic temples, but adding to that.
Yeah, so I suppose, and again, this is only my own feeling. There's no direction necessarily that we've been given, and there's no. I don't speak for the church or for my company either, but I think there was an announcement about the Moroni's on temples not being
Oh yes.
so frequently added, and I think almost all the temples now that are being designed are without a Moroni on top, and it just caused me to reflect on why might something that's become quite a popular symbol of our religion, or a well-known symbol of our religion, not be continued forward. And the only answer I can think of is because it's something that um, kind of dominates the symbol of Christ. And do people think more of Moroni than they think of Christ in association with our religion? Um, so for that reason, I think perhaps you look at temples like the Salt Lake Temple and the Nauvoo Temple, which have a lot of overt symbolism, a lot of stars and suns and moons, and even figures and hands and eyes. Um, but I think these symbols perhaps sometimes can be distracting from the true, or the most important symbol, which is Jesus Christ. And again, that's just my personal take on it. And I think often, myself included, but a lot of members really like to delve into the meanings behind certain things, and ultimately the the temple is to guide us towards our covenants and towards Jesus Christ, Heavenly Father, and our heavenly home. And I think reminding us of those covenants is the most important thing. So perhaps that's why there's fewer suns, moons, and stars on our temples nowadays.
No, yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. And I wonder if there's anything you can share with relation to how it's been as a professional architect working with the church on a temple compared to a lot of the other, say, commercial, retail, or residential, um, the kind of bread and butter of architecture that you will be working with. Obviously, the temple is kind of a unique project. Has anything stood out to you so far in that journey?
Well, for starters, most of my clients don't begin meetings with a prayer, but when we were first when we were first appointed by the church and sat in a meeting with them over Microsoft Teams, one of them started the meeting with a prayer, and I thought, wow, how refreshing and how kind of unashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ these people are. I suppose it's just a part of their life, even though they're working professionals. And
Was that even with kind of your colleagues on the call as well that were not of our faith as well?
yes, yeah. So
Oh, right, that's cool.
that was something that my boss and my other colleagues, no one else is a member of the church, and yet they were sitting there reverently while a prayer was being said. And I think, yeah, generally there's been a lot of respect really for um, what's being done. And at first I thought it might be a little awkward, but I realized, generally people are happy to respect other people's beliefs, and um, they understand, if we were building a mosque for someone and, they had their particular, religious traditions, you know, we'd be accepting of them. And if we were building, an office for a certain company and they had their motto that they wanted to say at the beginning of every meeting, then we'd probably say that as well. So that was a little interesting thing. Um, and then more generally, I find that I've been really struck by how focused they are on being good neighbours. Um, I think that's something that perhaps I didn't consider. Not that I wouldn't think that the church is good neighbours, but in terms of holding a meeting for the local people around the site and explaining what the temple is and why it's important to them, and why we're seeking uh, planning approval for it, and equally, uh, making commitments to when it's on site and building work is going on, to not be, working unsociable hours, to not be, muddying the roads with vehicles going back and forward, and all these kind of things was really kind of at the forefront of their agenda. So that's another thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. Did you go to that meeting with the residents?
Yes, I was there. I gave a short presentation, and it's very interesting. These public consultation meetings, um, you don't really know what to expect. If you are building anything, if you're building a block of flats or an apartment block, or if you're building an Aldi where there used to be just a flat land, that everyone's going to have an opinion, whether they think, oh, great, I can shop on my doorstep, or whether they think, oh, this is an eyesore. Everyone will have their opinion of the proposal. So we went into the meeting not really knowing, and again, um, someone from the church suggested that we, as a design team, pray before the meeting, and that really, I could tell, really settled everyone's nerves, because what could have devolved into pitchforks and what why is this temple being built, um, really led to a lot of understanding. A lot of people just wanting to know why. There's already a church on that site, a chapel, and the people meet there and have great relationship and great connections with the community. And so it was really nice to hear about the positives that they already see of having members of the church in their community. And yeah, I'd say that it's it's very rare for one of those meetings to end with a round of applause, but that's what we got at the end. And
No way.
yeah, usually it's more like a shouting match, but yeah, it ended with a round of applause, and so, there's starting with a prayer and ending with a round of applause is not much, more I could ask really for a public consultation.
That's so interesting. Yeah, and so something that I'd like to ask about the differences between Preston and Birmingham Temple, or the designs, is, well, Preston and London are quite large temples,
Mhm.
and Birmingham seems like it will be quite a small in size temple. Uh, and I'm wondering, have you had any difficulty fitting everything in to the layout? Were there challenges with that, getting everything that you need to in there and still making it quite a an organized, peaceful process for people that will experience the temple?
Well, there's been some difficulties, but they're not perhaps the most interesting to talk about, but I can give a bit of background. Like I said, the church does have standard layouts that it knows works,
Right.
and the presiding bishopric, I think they're generally over the temporal affairs of the church and the construction of temples. I think in a video from them, they said they have these standard plans for essentially small, medium, large, extra large temples. So we had a basis to go on, which we know have been built elsewhere, um, without major issues. And so when you say, can we fit everything in? I suppose everything for a temple, everything that it really needs are the rooms to perform ordinances. And it does have all of those. You can perform all the
Hey.
ordinances in the temple, in the Birmingham Temple. Does it fit everything in terms of having a chapel where you might wait in silence, waiting for an endowment session? It doesn't. Does it have a expansive lobby and areas to sit and um, contemplate? And uh, does it have that in the kind of front end of the temple where the recommend desk is and things like that? No, it doesn't. But it does have the essential rooms that needed for all the ordinances to be performed. And I suppose when it comes down to it, that is what really matters. And it's been interesting rewiring my brain to what a temple is, because I've worshipped in London and I've worshipped in Preston, and I've thought, oh, well, this is a little bit different. Things are going to have to work a little bit differently in this temple. But I'm confident they will work, just because this isn't the church's first rodeo. This isn't the first time they built a temple, um, and yeah, I think it might take some adjustment for some members, but um, the important things are there. And in terms of struggling to fit things in, some things that are different from perhaps a American generated floor plan to a British one, like I mentioned. There's fire regulations, which are a lot more stringent over here. There's accessible accessibility regulations for wheelchair users, or people who have other needs that are perhaps more stringent here than in the US. And so some of these things in the floor plan we had to rearrange, chop and change, enlarge, shrink, and still make sure it all worked. It's a little bit like a Tetris puzzle, because you're given these rooms that the temple needs to function, and then you think, okay, but the cubicles in the UK need to be 300 millimeters wider each one, and then what are the knock-on effects of that? So, whilst toilet cubicles aren't the most interesting aspects of temple design, every aspect is considered, and we don't want don't want anyone's experience to be compromised.
With the kind of inspiration that you took and the team took for the design to kind of be related to and have resemblances to kind of local English churches from different denominations, was there any kind of, did that come into the layout at all, or is that more the exterior design? Because I know when you look at the rendering from the front, it kind of has that church, kind of Anglican church or even cathedral like look from the front. And obviously, there's a lot of symbolism for other denominations in the layout, in that many of them will actually be like a cross
Mhm.
when you look at a cathedral. Uh, was that anything spoken about with the design here, or is it very much just the exterior, and then we've got this plan that kind of goes back to President Hinckley on his flight when he had that inspiration for a design and all of that?
That's a really interesting story, actually. The President Hinckley one. Um, perhaps it's a little disappointing answer, but the internal and the internal and the external, um, they do relate to each other in terms of, I suppose, the way that certain rooms on the inside are expressed on the outside, through the different types of windows or the different ceiling heights. But in terms of the floor plan, it, it's it's quite symmetrical, and that's obviously something that is, an age-old principle of architecture, of symmetry, of order, of things being, in harmony. Um, but other than the symmetrical nature of the building and the route from the entrance all the way through to the back where the celestial room is, um, I don't think there's much more in terms of, the layout having a particular message. Although I suppose, like I've just said, going from the entrance to the celestial room, it is a journey, isn't it? Like the endowment, and that is a journey, that you go on through the temple as things become more significant spiritually. They also become more significant architecturally. So maybe I'll revise my answer to that one and say, there is a logic and an order to the way that it's laid out, and you enter from the front, which is the least significant spiritually, just the entrance, the entryway, and you walk through various ordnance spaces and end at the celestial room, which is the most significant and, like I said, the most ornate or the most decorative architecturally.
As someone interested in architecture, my friend who's an architectural historian came on the show a month or so ago and shared about the differences or the evolution um, of church layouts and what they spoke. When congregations used to face each other, and then they faced the pulpit, and then they faced the altar, and depending on kind of the doctrine and theology of the time or the denomination. But then it led me to think like, oh, how rich are our chapels and temples in symbolism in that sense? And actually, when you think about it, there's an abundance, and as you alluded to there, I mean, Peter talked about in Preston how you can see you enter and the timber interior is darker, and then it changes from timber to other materials, and by the end of your journey through the ordnance spaces, you're being met with golden doors and railings, and the lights get brighter as you progress, and the chandeliers get more grand, and it really is. There is so much if you have an interest in that and you're going through the temple, it's like that is a learning experience of its own. So uh, yeah, I love reading into that when I visit the temple.
Yeah, and for myself, even though I am an architect and I've had an interest in architecture, there's a lot of things that these principles that you've just talked about that I wasn't aware of myself, until I had to look at it with the Birmingham Temple. And then when I visited other temples, I've seen these principles of progression and of becoming brighter, becoming more decorative, becoming more important and significant as we go through the temple. I've seen those things that I've not noticed before. So there's a lot of that kind of symbolism, which isn't detracting from the experience, but is just there to kind of serve your journey through the temple.
You mentioned earlier that you've seen how the church is streamlining the design and construction of temples, and I was just wondering if you could dig into that a bit more, because that's really interesting to hear about that. And we heard about these modular things happening in America and things like that. I don't know, from your point of view, it would be great to get some insights on how that is changing and evolving and innovating.
Yes, I think the Helena, Montana temple was a modular construction. For those who don't know, that's essentially where parts of the temple were constructed in a factory or in a warehouse. And when I say parts of a temple, I'm talking about entire rooms. They'll tile the floor, they'll put in the stained glass in the windows, they'll put the ceiling in with lights, and just have the wires sticking out at the top so that that entire room can be placed on the back of a lorry, brought to the site, and just placed in place. And where the two modules overlap, they might need to patch it up with tiling, they might need to wire in the lights, but it means that while they are constructing the temple, they can have a lot more quality control. They're within a warehouse, they've not got the hot sun, they've not got the rain, they've not got the snow, whichever climate they're in, to battle against, but they can really have a controlled environment to get the precision and the quality that temples require. And so that's one aspect in terms of construction methods that things might be sped along. I think in the UK, there's not a lot of companies that can do that kind of construction, and so at least for the Birmingham Temple, that's not a solution we're looking for, but perhaps in the future, the ones that you mentioned. And then, as I mentioned, in terms of designing certain floor plans, certain templates, which can be used as a starting point for temples, because obviously I'm a member of the church, but none of my colleagues are, and on plenty of other temples around the world, they're not having church members work on the temples. And so to go to these people and to say, can you design as a temple? There's obviously a steep learning curve for a company to even understand, you know, what is a ceiling room, or what is an endowment room? What are the requirements of that room? How big does it need to be? Or are there any requirements in terms of lighting and these things that are kind of second nature for me in terms of taking things for granted would take a lot of time to learn. And especially with so many temples being announced, the church would spend a lot of their time, I think, just answering queries about, what is the purpose of a temple? What is the purpose of each of these ordnance rooms? And, why they're designed the way they are. So that's one way they're streamlining with these templates, I suppose. And then just in terms of the way that the church operates, I suppose, they have a special projects department which facilitates a lot of these temples. The construction of the temples, I should say, sorry. The temple department is the one who facilitates the operation of the temple, so there's a bit of a handover between those two departments. But the special projects department are employing people with experience in building temples who have been designers, so they've been my side of the table in designing temples, and then the church will employ them, and they might be over 5, 10, 15 temples, and they're able to impart their wisdom to the likes of people like me in order to get that process going a little bit faster. So they're just some of the ways in which I think the church is having to adapt to the amount of temples being announced.
It is amazing when you consider this kind of period of temple building that we're in. And I guess it's people our age, we're not too dissimilar in our age, and it's cool, but it's also like I feel like there's been this kind of period is extended for most of my life, but it's definitely become more rapid under President Nelson. Um, but when people are saying like I think President Nelson, when he was born, there must have been like 5 temples or something, and now there's I think over 300 announced, and probably more. I can't speculate, but I'm guessing that at the end of conference in April there'll be a handful more announced as they usually are. You can't take anything for granted, but um, as a member of the church and not kind of with your hat on as an architect, what are your kind of thoughts about this period of temple building we are in, and how has your experiences doing this with the Birmingham Temple kind of re-emphasize the importance of covenants to you?
Well, for the first part of that question, how do I feel about it? I'm really excited. I have a couple of stats which may be out of date just because,
Oh,
every
we love stats.
every conference more being announced. But at least in the first 150 years of the church, so from 1830 to 1980, in the first 150 years, the number of temples dedicated was 19. And President Nelson has announced more than 19 temples in one conference session before. In I think last year, one of the sessions, he announced more than 19 in one session. And so there's currently, like you say, over 300 that are announced or in construction. President Nelson, of the over 300, I wish I had the figure off the top of my head. Of the over 300, President Nelson's announced 153 temples, so
Blimey.
almost over half. And I think this is from a presentation I was giving in September. So there's been an October conference since then. So he's probably announced close to half of the temples. Why do I find that so exciting? I suppose because I really take comfort in my covenants. I think that growing up, perhaps I didn't understand the importance of covenants. I think for my baptismal covenant, for example, I understood what it meant to be baptized, in that I wanted to be good, I wanted to follow Jesus. But it's only later on in life that I've studied, um, in Mosiah chapter 18, or in Doctrine and Covenants chapter 20, about the covenants that people make at baptism, to mourn with those that mourn, to comfort those that stand in need of comfort. And obviously there's always, with covenants that we make, promises that we make to God, he promises us blessings. And for baptism, when we receive the gift of the Holy Ghost, we are promised that we can always have that Spirit to be with us. And similarly, there's an oath and covenant of the priesthood. And again, when I got the priesthood, I perhaps thought, I can pass the sacrament now I'm 12, and maybe I'll have some duties and some responsibilities. But there is, an oath and a covenant which comes along with receiving the priesthood, and that's in Doctrine and Covenants 84. I'll leave people to study these in their own time. And again, there's promised blessings associated with that, to have all that the Father hath. And then again, the initiatory, the endowment, and the temple sealing. A lot of the covenants we make are in the wording of those ordinances when you visit the temple, but also a lot can be read in the general handbook, in chapter 27. It talks a lot about the covenants there, and the promised blessings, again, often cited in the words of the ordinance itself. So when I really understood that, the covenant path, which has been a term that's been used with more frequency lately. The covenant path wasn't just, a series of checkpoints. Yeah, tick, got the priesthood, tick, got my endowment, I can go on my mission. But really, they are real promises with real power. And when I've studied what promises I've made, I'm able to recognize God's promised blessings in my life a lot more. And that's why it makes me excited that temples are going to be dotting the earth, because more people will be able to receive those ordinances and covenant to be better citizens in their community, better family members. I was going to say husbands and fathers, but any family member, wives and mothers and brothers and sisters, and better disciples of Christ. So that's really, really interesting to me and important.
I heard that there was quite a cool kind of miracle or cool experience with the planning um, process of this. And I remember we were kind of asked in the UK to fast, and many of us were fasting and praying for the planning application to go through. There was something like that, wasn't there? Could you share the experience of getting the planning through?
There was a lot of things to mention in terms of getting the planning approval. It wasn't necessarily a smooth process, but as we were nearing the end of 8 or 9 months, the stake presidency asked for the entire stake to fast and pray for the temple to receive planning approval. And bearing in mind, we would have expected probably 3-4 months for a decision to be made, and it was coming to double that time. And so the stake presidency made an announcement on Facebook to all the pages this coming Sunday, and this was on Thursday in November. It was the Thanksgiving Thursday. I can't remember the exact date. This coming Sunday, let us all fast for the approval of the Birmingham Temple. And that message got out, and then that very afternoon, I checked the planning portal to see the application, and it said it was approved. We didn't receive any notification. We didn't receive any notification at my work, and that's also not how it usually works. But you just kind of have to check the website and keep refreshing and seeing what happens. And that very afternoon, it was approved, and so the stake presidency made an edit and said, "Well, even just the mention of a fast seemed to push it over the line. So we'd invite you all now to fast in gratitude, with it being American Thanksgiving, even though we don't necessarily celebrate that here. We'll give a fast of Thanksgiving for the approval of the Birmingham Temple." And so that was
Wow,
a really timely fast, and who knows how long it would have taken otherwise.
that's amazing. Yeah, that's really cool. Thank you for sharing that. Something that's jumped out to me from the two interviews with you and Peter is how cool it is that Peter was kind of Peter was a church member linked with the architecture and design of the temple that was very, very local to him, where he was born and raised and all of that. And now we have the Birmingham Temple, where you are involved as a Latter-day Saint well, funnily enough, the same architectural firm. Um, and this is a temple that is connected to you in a deeper way because of the locality of your life to it as well. And I guess from that, what does it mean to you to be able to be that kind of person involved where um, you have that sense of ownership anyway with the temple because of where you live, and to have one so local to you and to be working on it?
Well, from a purely practical point of view, which is the least important point of view, but purely practical point of view, being less than 15 minutes away from my house, it's going to be incredible. After work, I can I
Yeah.
can go and I can go and serve in the temple, or if I was working in the youth program, we could go on a Tuesday evening to do baptisms, and that accessibility would be great. On a spiritual level, I think it will, it will have a deep connection with me, and even as I've been working on it, um, I've had the feeling. Well, since I've been working on it, I've had a son, my first son.
Of
He's 6
course,
months old,
yeah.
and when he was born, and I'd gone back to work after paternity leave, I was working on the temple, and it just struck me one day, my own son will could one day visit this temple and may well be sealed in this temple. And whilst that would be nice because I've worked on it and it would have that connection to me, I think more than that, just reflecting on it, it made me really happy to think that my son one day would want to make covenants or would find someone that he wants to marry in the house of the Lord. I think that brings me immensely more joy than just, saying, "Oh, my signature's on the bottom of some drawings that contributed to this temple." And I don't mean to diminish my experience working on it in any way. It's obviously an immense blessing and a privilege, and I know a lot of people who would love to be in my position, but I really don't. I don't feel like this is the temple that I've designed, or I don't feel like I should even claim any kind of ownership in that way. It feels wrong to me, and it actually feels uncomfortable sometimes. When I'm asked to give in a fireside, or maybe asked to come on a podcast to speak about it. Not not because I don't want to share and I don't want to share my joy with people, but because I feel like it's going to be just as much my temple as it's going to be thousands of other members when it's in operation. And um, you know, I do have some specific insights to it, but there's certainly a huge team of people who contribute to the design of it, the construction of it, the running of it, and 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 yeah, I think sometimes uh, I feel like people are asking me a lot about the temple, and I don't I don't feel like I I don't know. I don't feel like I should be the one to tell them all the information, or that I even want to people to know necessarily that um, I have such an involvement early on. But now that it is a bit more public, um, it's nice to be able to share, like I say, the things that I can provide my expertise on, but also the things that really matter to me, which is the covenants and perhaps that personal connection my family might have with this temple one day.
I think that's wonderful in and of itself, though, is that your involvement, which is more direct and deeper than at this current stage, basically all of the members in the vicinity, um, has given you a deeper respect for it and kind of a sacredness of it, a better understanding of it, and a re-emphasis on what really matters from it. And so you take from that, um, that the size of the temple doesn't matter, the external stuff and the design, it's nice, but even when you're knee deep in the weeds of doing that, it's still the thing that is most exciting and most kind of mind blowing is the opportunity of what you can do inside them. And I think, if that's the insight that you've taken away from your involvement in it, then I think that's a really priceless insight to take from it. And because you do work on it and have had that involvement with it, it's kind of it's even more profound, I would say, coming from you. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I guess I've got to ask you so far what your favorite experience has been on the temple, working on it so far.
Well, of the experiences that I can share, one thing that I really enjoyed was going over to Salt Lake City for a training that we were given there when we were involved quite early on. As I mentioned, quite a lot of people are not members of the church who are involved with the design and construction of temples, and so the church holds these trainings just to give a little bit of an insight. And for me, it was the excitement of the people there who, again, they're working with temples every day, they're living and breathing the architecture, these things, and the excitement that they were having for more temples being announced, and for even a lot, like has been said, a lot of these smaller temples. And David O. Bednar has a video where he talks about, there are no small temples in so much that there are no small covenants. But, if we take the floor area, Birmingham is smaller than London and Preston. And a lot of temples that are being announced are smaller. And to me, that's really exciting, because what that means to me is there's not going to be one huge temple in the capital city of a country, but there's going to be lots of small temples dotting each country. And I was just amazed every time that I thought, President Nelson is announcing so many temples. The people who are working in those departments are just thinking, there's only going to be more, and we need to prepare ourselves now to be able to, cope with the number of temples that are coming. And if Birmingham were 4 times the size, then it might mean in 10 years, when there's 5 other temples in the UK, it might mean that Birmingham might be left, empty and hard to operate, because you need so many people to man all the rooms and work it. But if it's small, then maybe when there are plenty of temples in the UK, then it might just be the temple for one stake. It might just be the temple for a couple of stakes. Who knows? And again, that's not anything that I've received specific guidance on in terms of the number of temples, but it was generally the feeling that a lot of temples will be coming, and in the millennium, everyone's work will need to be done, and it's through these temples that people will receive the ordinances this side of the veil as well as the next.
That's cool. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, this has been a really cool insight and update, I guess, into the progress of this temple that we in the UK are so excited to have. And I just can't wait to see it. You've got the groundbreaking in next month, right? Is it next month?
The 22nd of March, yes, is when it's been announced.
Will you be able to have one of those cool shovels, the posh shovels that they always have? Will you be taking part in it at all, or will you be at the sidelines watching?
Oh, I'm not sure. I'm not the one planning that, so I'll just wait to see if I receive an invitation and what my what I might do. But yeah, it's been great to be on the podcast, and I hope I've been able to give some insight and not be too vague. Like I say, there are certain things that I can't say. I do want to keep my job, but hopefully some people have learnt something.
Viewers, you should have heard the stuff we had to edit out. Honestly, terrible. No, I'm joking. No, thank you very much, Jacob. It's really been cool. So yeah, thank you for coming on, giving us the time and sharing that with us.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for watching For All the Saints. This show needs your help to grow. Please like the video, comment your thoughts, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone you think would enjoy it. Thank you.